Deputy Editor of Money Life. We are indeed proud to celebrate Money Life Foundation's second anniversary with today's special program with a very special guest. Dr. Subramanian Swamy is President of Janata Party and Member of Parliament. Mr. Jagdish Shetty.
Mr. Shetty is there.
Jagdish bhai, please. Mr. Jagdish Shetty is the General Secretary of Janata Party. And we have Mr. Jagdish Basu, Editor and Publisher of Money Life, as well as Founder Trustee of Money Life Foundation, and Ms. Sucheta Dalal. She is the Managing Editor of Money Life, as well as Founder Trustee of Money Life Foundation. Before proceeding further, may I request my colleague, Shashi
Sir,
Kumar,
please.
to give a bouquet of flowers to Dr. Subramanian Swamy. Mr. Basu, can Thank you, sir. Let me now brief about Money Life Foundation and its activities. Money Life Foundation, launched 2 years ago on 6 February 2010, is a non-profit organization registered with the Charity Commissioner of Mumbai with a mission to spread financial literacy and to be the voice of Indian savers. The foundation is engaged in the literacy campaign and works towards safe and fair market practices through workshops, roundtable meetings, white papers, research, advocacy, awareness campaigns, and grievance redressal and counseling. Money Life Foundation's mission is to give a voice to those of us who work very hard, earn, and save, and still don't seem to have a say in the decisions that affects us. Because we are neither a vote bank nor a part of any vested interest. The foundation has set up a Money Life Knowledge Center, a lecture hall cum reading room that has hundreds of books and magazines on business, economics and finance. The foundation works at enhancing financial literacy at the grassroots level through a combination of focus workshops on issues based on real life situations and experiences, lectures by experts, panel discussions, focus group meetings to debate specific issues or regulatory changes. Membership to Money Life Foundation is completely free with no hidden riders, and so far thousands of people have been benefited from the initiatives. The membership is growing, and as of today Money Life Foundation has 7,388 members. There were 76 speakers who enriched over 9,200 attendees through our seminars, workshops and events since the launch. In just 2 years, Money Life Foundation has conducted over 100 seminars, including the regular one, How to be Safe and Smart with Your Money. That apart, we had seminars on the Union Budget, investments, savings, mutual funds, financial scams, pensions, insurance, wills, transmission and nominations, M-commerce, real estate, credit cards, tax returns, how to deal with mis-selling by banks, credit bureaus and credit scores and RBI. If you look into your envelopes, you will find the Money Life Foundation's free membership form. If you wish to receive updates about our future events and activities, please do fill up these forms. We have also given you a feedback form. You can help us to do things better by filling in the form and telling us how we could help you with a more detailed feedback on our initiatives. If you would like to contribute to help the foundation spread financial literacy, there is a donation form in your kit as well. Donations to Money Life Foundation are eligible for tax benefits under Section 80G of the Income Tax Act. May I now invite Sucheta Dalal, Founder Trustee of Money Life Foundation, to share with you few moments of our journey so far.
Good morning, everybody. I am well aware that you are all here to listen to Dr. Swamy. So I'm going to keep this really short. But since this is our second anniversary, please indulge me and let me talk about what we did for a few minutes. I'm not going to repeat what Yogesh said, but let me begin by thanking the Almighty for lining up an amazing series of victories for Dr. Swamy in the last week. More important and memorable beyond our expectations. In fact, we were supposed to have this event yesterday and we had to postpone it for today. So we were lucky that we got the postponement, and Dr. Swamy said, even if there is World War III, I am coming. And I also want to say that now I'm keep saying that there is no World War III, And all of last week, we really had to pray hard because on 30th of Jan, we were wondering whether there's going to be an arrest. After that, there were these two major victories, and we were wondering whether Delhi is going to just keep him over there. So we are just so thank God that you were able to come, and World War III or not, really appreciate that he's kept his word and been here with us in spite of all the pressures and demands on his time. You can just imagine how tense it must have been. For us, it's been an exhilarating 2 years. We have 7,388 members. We've conducted a record 105 workshops and seminars. Yogesh has told you the subjects that we did it on. This makes us the fastest growing NGO, I think barring India against corruption in recent times, but especially in the financial sector. Many of our members know that this is a non-partisan effort, and we run. One of the reasons why we set up Moneylife Foundation is that we realized that just running a fiercely independent and unbiased personal finance magazine was not enough, because every single day there are new scams that are burning a hole in people's savings. There is rampant mis-selling, there is outright fraud, and we realized that you have to do a lot more than that. So we took a route that is a little different from Dr. Swami's. He chooses to use the courts to fight a very steady, long-term battle. We also chose a long-term battle but went in for financial literacy, because we thought that if people are educated, they're likely to make less mistakes. And frankly, the kind of non-partisan effort that we make, we should have a lot more people, as Yogesh said, that if you want to be the voice of the savers, we are people, we the taxpayers, who do not have a voice in the system today at all, because we are not a vote bank, we are not a political vested interest that people have to pander to. So those who earn, save, pay taxes have almost no role in the system. And we keep saying, why not? Because if you are on the straight and narrow path and you're doing all that is right, then I think we should have a voice also. And we think we're going to get there, because ultimately we will have to take the path that Dr. Swami has taken, which is why when we chose today's subject, it's not just about the 2G scam and its implications, but what is it that we the people can do in order to make a difference. And we can't have a better role model on that than him. Our members, of course, know how that our advocacy is non-partisan, aggressively pro-saver. We don't recommend products and services. More importantly, we take a 360-degree view on individual needs, which means that apart from all the areas that Yogesh has talked about, we are also branching out into newer and newer things. Apart from the reading room, we've now started putting things on YouTube. So we've got a Moneylife channel. Everything that we do is transparently on our website, which is www.mlfoundation.in. Look at it. Every single workshop that we have done, along with photographs and a write-up on it, is there. So there's nothing that we do that is not in the public domain. It's transparently there for you to verify, check, and look at what we're doing. There are a lot of people to thank on this journey. It doesn't happen alone. And I need you to indulge me. I know it will sound like a speech at the Oscars, but today I think you will give me a couple of minutes. It's not going to be more than that. The first I have to thank, of course, is ICICI Bank. Because of their steady support, we've been able to grow so rapidly without wondering where the funding for every single workshop every week is going to come from. And this happened because of the vision that KV Kamath and Chanda Kochhar took. They looked at it personally, and Ms. Kochhar told us we would rather have an informed customer than a complaining one. And they could have taken the stand that a lot of things that we say, are products and services that they offer, but they have let us do this not just for 1 year, but for 2 years. So we are really delighted to have Anita Kant here with us today, and many of her colleagues. It's just too crowded. I don't know Vinod, Shiva, I hope they're all here. But thank you, Anita, for being there with us all the time. We have a tie-up with Disha Financial Counseling. This is another NGO that ICICI Bank has set up at the instance of the RBI. And that counseling gives an edge to what we do, because this is meant for distressed customers who have repayment problems. And people who have these problems can come and get free counseling. Doesn't matter which bank, it doesn't have to be ICICI Bank, it's any bank. And we are very happy that Mr. Madan Mohan, who has been offering this counseling for 2 years at the Moneylife Foundation, is here today. Last year I said that we want to branch out and go across the country, because we got a lot of requests from people saying, why are seminars only in Bombay? So I need to thank Union Bank of India, India Bulls, Bank of Baroda, because they are the ones who backed, again, on the same condition, non-partisan, fiercely independent, but they backed us to go to Pune, Nashik, Calcutta, Chennai, Hyderabad, Bengaluru, and Gurgaon. So we were able to spread our wings this year. We also give our special thanks to others who have helped individual programs on and off, including the Bombay Community Public Trust, Amara Trust, Nandi Insurance Broking, Cyrus Gazdar, Sumaira Abdulali of Awas Foundation, Anju Mudgal Kadam of Web TV. All of them help to enhance our programs from time to time. Then there is Sunil Dalal and Venkatesh from Soft Cell Technologies. We keep leaning on them heavily and all their staff, so we're very happy that they're here today. Apart from that, of course, there are our donors. Without our donors, it's not going to happen. And we have all kinds of donors. We are happy to say most of them are individuals. And we are particularly grateful and happy about the smaller donations, because when people come here, they attend and they think that they want to pass it forward by making a small donation. That is the biggest compliment to Money Life Foundation's activities. So we value all, but we value those even more than the others. In terms of what we did, Yogesh has already told you about the various seminars that we have conducted. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're going to do in the second year. So in the second year, we of course focus on right to information in a big way. This is part of Money Life's agenda of empowering people to fight for their own rights rather than depending on others to fight for them. I must say that we were truly enriched by close friends and colleagues who are stalwarts in RTI, who make sure that our workshops were tremendous. They are all activists in their own right, and they are not just people who came and spoke, they are fellow travelers in our journey. So starting from our consulting editors, Vinita Deshmukh and Viresh Malik, who are here today. From Pune, Vinita is here. Viresh, I saw him somewhere there. He's come all the way from Delhi. And several other activists, Sudhir Badami, Nagesh Kini, R. Vijay Raghavan from Chennai. Other friends and donors like Ashok Rawat, Indrani and Ashok Malkani, Dolphy D'Souza, Bhaskar Prabhu. Bhaskar incidentally has gone beyond RTI now. He's going to contest elections from at the municipal level. Bhaskar, please stand up. I think we need to support independent candidates, I think. And there are people like Sailesh Gandhi who have come here and spent time making our seminars worthwhile. Another important initiative was what we do for NGOs, because we want, the big allegation all the time is that NGOs are non-transparent and NGOs say that they don't want to be answerable. And we are addressing that. We have made sure that we have workshops for NGOs on what the rules are and what they need to comply with. So we've had various people. We're especially thankful to Mr. Gautam Shah, who's here, Noshad Dadrawala, because they have come and done several very popular workshops. And contrary to public opinion, and I must say this because Mr. Pankaj Mehta is here from the income tax, that there are plenty of NGOs who are very serious about wanting to comply with every rule. They come and attend the workshops and they want to, follow the letter of the law. We have also decided to focus on corruption in the media. That's another question that people ask us. What about you guys? Okay? And yes, there is a lot. We need to look inwards. Of course, yes, on Twitter, somebody called us alternative media and said that we are against mainstream media. But either way, I think we need to look at corruption in the media. So we are probably the only ones who have shown this extraordinary film called Brokering News by Umesh Agarwal at least 3 times. Many of you have come and attended it. It's a documentary that everybody must see. We've also aired Bellari Brothers and their issue in Karnataka. This was a film made by Paranjoy Gohachakurta. I know, again, lots of people in this audience have seen it. In the process, one of the things that we realized is that these are excellent documentary makers who spend months together shooting things, researching, and then they, reduce it to about 45 minutes or 1 hour. You can't get better educated in the shortest possible time than watching some of these award-winning documentaries, but they never get aired. So it was a decision. Last time my friend Smriti Kopikar was there at one of the discussions. There was a decision that day that we are going to start airing more of these wonderful documentaries. So anybody who wants to see any of this stuff, wants to be part of what we do, please fill up your membership form so that you get information about what we are doing. Next week, we're branching into another area, which is wellness. Now, medical corruption, the kind of money that you pay for treatments that you don't need is another thing that plagues all of us as individuals. So that is an area that we're going to focus on. We are kicking off our first lecture by Padma Bhushan Professor V.M. Hegde, another extraordinary person, hugely qualified, who's going to be here from Manipal on Tuesday. and that is a new initiative that we are going to take. Moneylife Foundation has had many well-wishers, including experts, many bankers who have told me they want to be here incognito, so I'm not naming names. And all of them are here for one thing today and one thing alone. Of course, many of them are kind enough to wish us for our 2nd anniversary, but the star of the show today is Dr. Swami. So I'm not going to take up any more of your time. If you see here, I'm going to ask Pradesh to introduce Dr. Swami on very high star. Thank you.
Thank you, Sucheta, and good morning, everybody. It gives me immense pleasure and joy to welcome you to Moneylife Foundation's 2nd anniversary program. Please do join me in congratulating once again Dr. Subramanian Swami for the extraordinary impact he has achieved in the 2G scan case, and also thanking him for finding time to address us despite the scorching pace he has set for himself in recent times. We deeply appreciate your gesture, sir. I have been asked to introduce Dr. Swami, and how does he need any introduction? For those who are in the 60s and 70s would remember him in some sort of a role. When I was young, in the 70s, I remember Marxists used to call him in Calcutta a CIA agent. Now, that's one of the very many different names that he's been called at different times. The average person seems to think of him as a maverick. Some people call him crazy. If so, we need many more crazy people like him. But the fact is that Dr. Swami has always had a method in his so-called madness, a consistent overarching philosophy as an individual battling the establishment, steadfast in his views and a pioneer in thought and action. His success with the 2G scam is a culmination of a lifelong record as an independent-minded politician, an independent-minded academic, and an independent-minded economic thinker. And these are some of the things that we tend to forget in the events that have happened very recently. I have pieced together some vignettes from his life that would underline exactly this. If he was not sitting here, Dr. Swami would have been a brilliant academic because he started his career with a PhD from Harvard in economics in 1965 when he was barely 26 under Simon Kuznets, subsequently a Nobel laureate. He taught at Harvard till 1969 when Amartya Sen sought him for a position in the Delhi School of Economics. He accepted the offer, but when he arrived, he found his appointment cancelled. One of the first of the many battles he started. Why? Because with strong views that India must have nuclear capabilities and pro-market policies. This was in 1969, when socialism and communism were at their peak, when banks and insurance companies were nationalized, license Raj was killing the consumer more than they were killing the businessman, and that's our view, and 90% of income level above a certain level was being confiscated by the government through so-called taxes. Both his so-called right-wing views on the nuclear option and pro-market policies became conventional wisdom much later, that is decades later. Dr. Swami was ahead of the time with his views, unafraid to express them and stuck to them and paid a price for it. Since the socialist-controlled Delhi schools shunned him, Swami moved to the Indian Institute of Technology, but he was more than a professor there, turning up at hostels to speak on domestic policies and international issues with students, articulating his so-called right-wing views. At that stage itself, he published what is called a Swadeshi plan. And the plan argued quite remarkably, with great foresight, that India did not need foreign aid. This was the time when we were dependent on foreign aid, which many of the youngsters don't remember. If it adopted market-friendly alternative to these great 5-year plans which was thrust upon us by the Fabian socialists of Nehru and the other ilk, which would fetch us 10% growth at that time and help us become an exporter of agricultural goods at a time when Indian farmers were really leading a hand-to-mouth existence. So I wanted to bring out all of these things because we think of him only as a crusader on the 2G scam case. This was again an example of clear, independent thinking, nationalist, and yet blending the market-driven policies of the West that have helped them get ahead. And these policies, these thought processes that he articulated by decades before such thinking became eventually the mainstream, not just all over the world, but also in India. Even as India struggled with its Hindu rate of growth at 3.5%, these ideas were ridiculed. It was worse actually, personally for him, because it was against the dominant ideology of the dominant party at that time. In March 1970, during a parliament debate on the budget, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi mentioned Dr. Swami by name and dismissed him as Santa Claus with unrealistic ideas. He persisted with his ideas until on a particular day in December 1972, just a couple of years after he had joined IIT, he was sacked from IIT with effect on a given day at 5 p.m. with a letter that was delivered to him at 5:15. His wife, who taught mathematics, was also sacked. Swami took IIT court, whereas, as you know, that's what he does very well, eventually winning his case in the Supreme Court in 1991. He rejoined as a professor for one day and then resigned. And I'm not sure whether this is true, but we gather that he still has a case pending against IIT for a claim of salary arrears from 1972 to 91 period, which he won with 18%. By the mid-70s, the decades of oppressive and backward economic policies that India followed since independence was beginning to take its toll, and winds of change were blowing. Dr. Swami became very politically involved. He joined the Jayaprakash Narayan Sarvodaya movement, which was ideological and political foundation for the Janata Party later. Dr. Swami entered the Rajya Sabha in 1974. In 75, Mrs. Gandhi declared emergency and Dr. Swami faced arrest. Disguised as a Sikh, he escaped to Chennai, Sri Lanka, and then to the United States, where he became a spokesperson for the India's opposition and also took up visiting professor assignment at Harvard again. On 10th August 1976 was the opening day of the monsoon session of the parliament. Dr. Swami had been away from the parliament for 6 months and could have lost his seat for non-attendance. So he returned, entered the parliament, remember the arrest warrant was still on, and took his seat. With the chairman of the House, then Vice President B.D. Jatti, was making obituary references, Dr. Swami got up and said, "I have a point of order. There's no obituary reference here for democracy. It has also died." The speaker was rattled. He asked members to stand in silence for those notables who had died recently. With the rest of the House standing in silence, Dr. Swami ran out, having registered his presence. Of course, the security was minimal those days. After leaving the parliament, he changed to kurta and put on a kada, resembling a youth Congress leader. Sanjay Gandhi public meeting had just got over, and he joined the procession moving towards the railway station. He boarded a train to Mathura and later crossed over to Nepal and flew from there to Bangkok and to the US. How did he do this? How the foreign government honored his cancelled passport is a mystery to all of us. Someday, Dr. Swami should reveal to us through an autobiography. And as we were discussing just a little while ago, there's somebody, a well-wisher, a friend of Money Life Foundation, Rajiv Shah, who's right here. And Dr. Swami apparently had stayed in his house in Satara during the same period during emergency, where he was taking shelters at different places. Thank you, Rajiv, for sheltering Dr. Swami at that time. Dr. Swami held important positions as a minister and planning commission member under the Janata government, and again in 1991 in the Chandrasekhar government. In November 78, he was a member of a group of eminent persons called to prepare a report for the United Nations on cooperation and agreement between developing countries. He simplified trade procedures and formulated a new export strategy, which became the forerunner of trade reforms, which was adopted subsequently by all countries. In one of the most intriguing episodes of Indian politics at that time, in 1994, he was appointed the chairman of the Commission on Labour Standards and International Trade by Narasimha Rao. It was a cabinet rank position which Dr. Swami held as an opposition party member and in a Congress government, and was often being invited to cabinet meetings. This was the first time something like this has happened in India. But the more interesting part of this episode was that the commission was placed under the Commerce Ministry. And guess who was the Minister of State reporting to Dr. Swami as a Minister of State for Commerce? A certain gentleman called Mr. P. Chidambaram. By the way, liberalization measures that Narasimha Rao and Dr. Manmohan Singh initiated in 1991 were drawn up in 1990 when Chandrasekhar was the Prime Minister and Dr. Singh was the advisor. Indeed, Dr. Manmohan Singh recently stated that Dr. Swami was the first to envisage and articulate the need for extensive reforms, economic reforms that we've seen subsequently in India. With a life as colorful as this, there are many interesting stories from Dr. Swami's life, but I will end with just a couple of short points. As part of his forward thinking, Dr. Swami advocated normalizing India's relationship with Israel and China way back in the 1970s. In 1982, he became the first Indian political leader to visit Israel, meeting top Israeli leaders. India and Israel subsequently opened embassies in each other's countries in 1992. Dr. Swami was a decade ahead of this actual event. In 1981, he persuaded Deng Xiaoping to open Kailash Mansarovar in Tibet to Hindu pilgrims from India, and became the first Indian to visit Kailash on Mansarovar after the lunar period. If he hadn't joined politics, Dr. Swami would have been a distinguished academic, as I mentioned, especially since he was a China expert from the beginning, and China, as you know, is absolutely hot now. Dr. Swami has argued throughout 70s that China's data of economic progress under Mao was grossly exaggerated. He was proved right in a pretty funny way. In 1980, China asked World Bank for concessional aid. The World Bank told China, but you are not entitled to aid because according to your data, your per capita GDP is much higher than the threshold of countries which qualify for concessional aid. The Chinese argued all that data is all wrong, it was all Mao era exaggeration. Please read Subramanian Swami's research on China. Coming back to today's theme, a big lesson for those who want change is that you can get a lot done within the system. Dr. Swami has done something that seems absolutely impossible otherwise. Actually getting a government decision involving tens of thousands of crores, including illegal payoffs, scrapped. Most importantly, has done what can be called as an inside job, using available tools such as a code of law. Those who talked of supremacy of legislature and parliament in the recent agitation of Anna Hazare should have their mouth absolutely shut now. One last point, Dr. Swami has always held controversial views, especially on religion. Some people call him a Hindu bigot, but the facts are as follows. His wife is a Parsi, his brother-in-law is a Jew, his son-in-law is a Muslim, and his sister-in-law a Christian. With these things to us, I would now request the man of the decade, who single-handedly has done more for successfully exposing corruption than anyone else in recent memory, to please address us this morning. After all, it's not very often that we get a full Harvard tenured professor as our politician, and we should make the best of it. None other than Dr. Subramanian Swami.
Thank you, Mr. Basu. I hope I'm able to live up to the build-up you have given. I think you must be CIA to know all these details. हाँ, करूँगा. आप सवाल पूछिए हिंदी में, मैं जवाब दूँगा. But any adulterate भाषण तो मैं दे नहीं सकता. First of all, I'd like to congratulate Sucheta Dalal, who people had warned me is a financial terrorist, but then she only attacks those who are corrupt. For her second anniversary in this Money Light Foundation, very active, she writes very well, written for a long time. And therefore she qualifies as a genuine intellectual, not the ones that you normally see, who are always on the side of the government. I would like to divide my topic today in three parts. Why is 2G so important? Two, what are the ramifications or implications that flow out of 2G? And three, what is it that we can do to see such things don't happen in the future? Today, we can boast of a very high rate of growth, leave aside the last 2 years. But we can also recognize the fact that our rank in the Transparency Index on corrupt nations has been falling steadily. And now out of 124 countries, our rank is 95. And we are just a little ahead of Pakistan, that's no satisfaction. And we are way below all others who are no better than us in economic development. We didn't have a reputation for being corrupt. 1600 years ago, Farsian came from China, and he recorded that the one thing that struck him about India was that people were so honest. He said people go out in the night without locking their houses, which he has not seen anywhere else. And he said if you by chance, by mistake, left anything behind on your travel, the people in India would hunt you down and give it back to you. And this is reaffirmed again by Yuan Chang, who came in 1100 AD. And then Vasco da Gama, Mark Twain, till about 300, 400 years ago. This was the general report of whoever visited India. Then suddenly, with the looting done during the East India Company period and the active promotion of bribery to get the public to comply, corruption began to take root in this country. And we expected in 1947, after we won the freedom struggle led by Mahatma Gandhi, who had the highest moral authority of all politicians of that century, that after 47 we would follow policies by which corruption would be minimized. But unfortunately, Mahatma Gandhi didn't remain. He was assassinated. Sardar Patel, another very strict disciplinarian, died in 1950. And Jawaharlal Nehru, while personally perhaps honest, had a tolerant view to colleagues who supported him but were corrupt. Krishna Menon, K.D. Malaviya, Ravi Ahmed Kidwai, a number of them were known to be corrupt, but Nehru, because they supported him, defended them. And Krishna Menon was the most outrageous example of that. But more than that, one of the worst things that happened to us after 47 was the adoption of the Soviet economic model. This economic model brought into existence what is called as a quota license Raj, where licenses were at high premium and a new group of people came, they were the touts, who could get you licenses. And sometimes if you get the license, you could sell it in the black market and make more profit than if you were actually used that license. And the license quota Raj laid the foundation for our corruption. And this went on, increasing as time went by. And after economic reform, I would have assumed that this corruption would go down. But a cultural change has taken place with globalization, which has now planted the seed of greed in all of us. And much of our problems today in corruption arises out of greed, that money can buy everything. This is not our tradition, because our tradition, in fact, symbolized by Mahatma Gandhi, and was brought home to me when I first went as a student to get my PhD at Harvard. And my American colleagues said to me, "How is it that you people of India followed Mahatma Gandhi?" So I said, "Why? What's wrong with that?" So one of the American students told me, "Because he's not even properly dressed. How can you follow a leader who's not properly dressed?" I said, "What about your country?" So he said, "In our country, if a leader is not properly dressed, with a tie and coat and shining shoes, then we will not follow him. If Mahatma Gandhi came to America and tried to lead us, we probably put him in jail for indecent exposure. That is how our cultural habits are." And that made me think, how is it that we all followed a person who was as simply dressed, as minimally dressed as Mahatma Gandhi? We look at our spiritual leaders also, they are very simply dressed. Look at the spiritual leaders of other religions in, say, Italy or Vatican. You will see what pomp and glory they are dressed in. So therefore, somewhere our society was structured on the concept of sacrifice. And therefore this sacrifice meant giving up, and that was extolled. I don't find any other society which has that. And in fact, today increasingly you find a large number of adherents to sadhus and Swamijis. You take Sri Sri Ravi Shankar's ashram, how many foreigners flocked there? Or Sai Baba's when he was there, or any of the other sadhus. In America, you find whichever sadhu has gone from here is able to establish a huge following. Baba Ramdev, for instance, has got a huge following abroad. Even I, whose name is Swami, I am a bogus Swami, not a real one. When people don't know my background, they think that I am a Swamiji, so they phone me up while I am in America to ask me whether I can teach them how to get mental peace. Recently, there was a very famous actress in Hollywood called Julia Roberts, and she came to Haryana to do some shooting. And then some of her people in the company took her to meet a sannyasi in an ashram. And then the sannyasi asked her, "What is wrong with you?" So she said, "I have made billions of dollars, but I am not happy and I am not able to understand why." And that led to 2 weeks in that ashram where she learned so many things, including pranayam and yoga, and how to be non-attached, how money was not everything, and how our society was structured on the principle that money was not the decider of social status. For example, the old Hindu society was built on this Varna system, which is now degenerated because it's got linked with birth. But originally you found that those who were most venerated were the scholars, and they didn't have any weapons or wealth or land. And the people who had weapons had to take advice from them and act according to their advice, which was not the same thing in Europe, where people with weapons became kings and they would decide everything. So this society was structured on the basis that money will not decide your social status. Unfortunately, that's what we have lost or losing. And consequently, we have not lost it because there's no other explanation for Anna Hazare's popularity in our country except that old value, that person of sacrifice should be venerated. Otherwise, today Anna Hazare is not happening. So, if somebody says, why is it that after economic reform we are still increasing corruption? It is because of this factor, that it is now becoming more and more materialistic society. Our ancient values were that there should be a balance between spiritual values and material progress. And that is now becoming instead of a two-dimensional approach or a blend of two values, now we are becoming more and more materialistic. And I find this amongst all. I went recently to IIM Bangalore to teach students, give a lecture to students, and I asked the class, after all this stiff competitive exam you're coming here, what for? What is it that attracts you to this MBA course? And 99% of the class, there was only one exception in a class of almost 100, 99% said, because once we get an MBA, we'll get a good job. And probably we'll also get a good bride. That is what the boys said. Now, I said, you mean theory of marketing or theory of finance and these things do not appeal to you so much? No, that is all right, but only if you get MBA are we assured of a job. Now that shows the new attitude that everything is being measured on how much you can earn and how well off you are and how quickly you become the law. And this is the foundation of corruption I want to tell you, which is propelling our country today increasingly, and this is what we have to stem if we want a long-run solution. Now, 2G is a very, it's really a phenomenon because its ramifications are enormous. What is 2G? Many people ask me. Somebody asked Manmohan Singh and he said, Sonia Ji and Rahul Ji. That's all he needs to know. He doesn't need to know anything else. But basically, 2G means it's G stands for generation. So it's a second generation. Of what? The first generation was when the cordless phone came. You could make a call, and without a wire, the person you called would pick up the phone, you'd hear the ring, and you'd pick up the phone, you could have a telephone conversation. Then came 2G with mobile phones, where you would be able not only to make a telephone call, but send SMS, email, even pictures. Now, what is the difference between these two? Well, in the 1G, the waves, the sound waves that go, they go in cycles, but long cycles. 2G, there's more information going, so the cycles are more. 3G, you make a phone call, the other side picks it up, you can see that person, you can see a video of that person on your telephone. And therefore the cycles are even more. 4G, there will be even more information to send, large documents that can be sent. So, G is generation. In generation in Hindi it will be called PD. Pehla PD, dusra PD, tisra PD, like that. And this is what distinguishes, and these have to go through the sky, and you have to make sure that you don't collide with other waves. So therefore you have to partition the sky, and that partitioning, if I may simplify it, is spectrum, and that is not unlimited, so it has to be sold as a scarce resource. But what happened in the 2G matter is that it was not sold at the highest price. It was in fact arbitrarily decided to sell it at 2001 price. 2001 price was at a time when we had only 4 million mobile sets. In 2008, we had 700 million mobile sets. So the market had become huge. There were a flood of applications. And Mr. Raja, who was the telecom minister, used all his methods to ensure that his favorites at least got the license. In the end, 9 got it, and 2 of them were his favorites. And these were favorites, the Swan Telecom and the Unitech. Both are real estate companies. They had nothing in telecom whatsoever. Not a single tower, no equipment, nothing, no background. They are pure real estate companies. And by all his fiddling around with this so-called first come first serve policy, he ensured that they were able to get the 2 licenses. And 7 others got it. Tata got it, Vodafone got it, so many others got it. But of all these got 9 at 2001 price. Had we auctioned in 2008, we would have probably got 10 times the price. Now there is a lot of controversy on that because the CAG says, had we auctioned it, we would have got 1,76,000 crores more. Now this has been rubbished by a lot of Congress politicians. Kapil Sibal said that, no, the loss is 0. And people criticize him. So why blame him? He can't count beyond 0. So that is the level of education. And you see now, he may have been a lawyer, but he has forgotten everything in this pit of psychophancy. He has forgotten everything. Now the Supreme Court has said, in a landmark judgment cancelling all licenses, that a huge loss, perhaps in the range of the CAG estimate, has been incurred, and this is unbearable, and therefore must not only cancel it, but we must auction it. And if you auctioned it and you got anywhere near 1,76,000 crores, actually what we got was only 14,000 crores as revenue, because 1650 crores you multiply by 9 companies, you get about 15,000 crores. And this 15,000 crores is clearly an underestimate, because at least the Swan and Unitech sold it afterwards. Sold the company, the controlling interest of the company, to 2 foreign companies, Etisalat and Telenor, at 8 times the price. So therefore, if you just take that particular part, the eight times if they could sell, then India, the government of India could have also sold it at 8 times. 8 into 15 is automatically will give you 140 crores, right? No, they're 120 crores. And then you add the CDA, MA and all that, you'll come very close to 1,76,000. And if you put it at 10 times, you'll get even more, because Tata sold to Docomo at 13 times the price. And Estel sold to a Russian company at 20 times the price. So, because these companies had already telecom equipment and so on, whereas Swan and Unitech had nothing with them. So therefore 8 times is about the maximum that could be given. And so government definitely lost revenue. And this was because of the price fixed at that low level. And subsequently, Raja also changed the rules of the telecom by saying that even before rolling out your services, you can sell the controlling interest by share dilution to foreign companies in the name of FDI. Now, for a long time, people thought this is all Raja's work alone. And I, one day, was listening to television, and I found that the Prime Minister was speaking in Rajya Sabha on 24th to 2011, excuse me. And he was saying that somebody was attacking him for fixing such a low price. He said, what could I do? Under a NDA government cabinet resolution, 2 ministers were authorized to decide on behalf of the cabinet. One is the finance minister and the other is the telecom minister. And these 2 were completely empowered to decide the price and only report to me. And therefore, Mr. Chidambaram and Mr. Raja together decided the price and came and informed me on 4th July 2008. That is the first time I realized there was another player in that. And that was Mr. Chidambaram. But he, being a lawyer, and crooked lawyers are the most dangerous people in this world, who know how to get around and create alibis for themselves, his name had not figured anywhere. So then I started hunting for documents, and I found that these documents were not easily available. Most of the time when I filed RTI applications, they said a note is not traceable. Fortunately, I found out that at least some of the documents were in the CBI file, which the CBI had confiscated, but the CBI wouldn't give it to me, so I went to court and got an order and got the CBI file. Today, you will read in the newspapers that Mr. Chidambaram, the court has freed him from being made a co-accused. This is a wrong judgment. And when I read the judgment, I was surprised what had happened, because the first 60 paragraphs of the judgment are all in my favor, and then last 3 paragraphs are all in favor of Chidambaram. So something fishy has happened. But I found in the judgment, the judge acknowledges, yes, Swami has proved that the price was decided, and the share dilution was also decided by Chidambaram and Mr. Raja. And while Mr. Raja charges have been framed on him for these 2 things, the judge concludes that just because Mr. Chidambaram decided with Mr. Raja doesn't mean that he is also participated in the criminality unless proved otherwise. That means I and somebody else participated in a murder. I give the murderer a knife and say, kill him. And then later on you say, all he did was pass the knife. and that's all. There's no criminal liability. I think first of all the judge got it wrong, and I'm surprised he got it wrong. He's a very good judge. It must be for God knows what reason. I'm at least not going to speculate in public on what the reason is, even if I know privately what the reason is. The issue is this, that the whole idea of summoning Mr. Chidambaram was to ask him on the witness box or as an accused or through his lawyers, why did you agree to the price of 2001? The whole establishment of a criminality will come in the trial. In the summoning stage, I have to only show that there exists a doubt. And that Supreme Court judgments have said number of places that you don't have to prove the case that a person is guilty to have him summoned. You have to show that he could be guilty. And that is sufficient. And unfortunately, the judge has not done that, and he has acted on a wrong basis. So I am, it's all right, it happens all the time, because when I wanted the licenses to be cancelled, I had gone to the Delhi High Court, they dismissed it also. And then I went to Supreme Court and we got a wonderful order. So in our judicial system, we have a three-layered system, and it's allowed because judges are human beings, they can make mistakes. So consequently, I can tell you today that it is Mr. Chidambaram and Mr. Raja who together decided that the price of spectrum should be at 2001, and within the next 2-3 months I will prove it in the Supreme Court. Because if this judgment remains, then tomorrow Raja will come and say that Mr. Chidambaram is not criminally liable, I am also not criminally liable. Because I only listened to his advice, and that comes out in the file also. This Chidambaram was the Bada Ustad and Raja was the Chota Ustad, you see. And he recorded that. Mr. Chidambaram told me like this. Mr. Chidambaram, the finance minister, told me like this. So what has happened is that we have lost at least 1,76,000 crores. It could be more if you take the market price, prevailing market price to be more. And with that money, you could have had, at least for the next 25 years, a zero tax, income tax. This country needs a zero income tax situation, without which we will not be able to fight black money. And I would suggest that if any government comes, you should have the courage to abolish income tax and send the CRP to put a lock on the income tax department. And ask all the officers to go and do rural electrification or something like that. Nothing has promoted corruption, black money as much as these taxes. And poor tax, who pays taxes? The rich don't pay taxes because they got chartered accountants to help them. And the poor don't have enough money to pay taxes. So it's the middle class. It's a salaried class, it's a professional class who pay the taxes. I don't see why they should pay taxes, because from indirect tax you get, even today, almost 88% of the total tax revenue. So therefore, I would say that if you could have got this money, even today because of the Supreme Court judgment, cancelling licenses, automatically what happens, all these bank guarantees are called for. And the initial fee of 1650 crores paid by each of these 9 operators, that is 15,000 crores, becomes part of the government revenue today. So government revenue will be already increased by 20,000 crores by just a simple Supreme Court order. And if you manage to auction it, you will definitely get at least 1,76,000. And that means not only you don't have to pay taxes, but all your infrastructure projects, all your power projects, all of them can be financed by this money. Can we get it back? Of course we can get it back. Why only 71,76,000? In foreign bank accounts, we have today 70 lakh crore rupees, almost 40% of our GDP, in foreign bank accounts. And these foreign bank accounts, you can get it back nowadays by a variety of methods. Some governments are willing to help us because of this terrorist financing. Many governments are ready to help us. Now, what is the technique? Now, for instance, the German government found that in Liechtenstein, neighboring country, they have a secret banking system there, and they found through their intelligence that their German officials are having accounts there. So what happened? The German government asked the Liechtenstein government, kindly give us the accounts of all our officials. We know they are officials, German nationals who have got accounts. So Liechtenstein said, no, nothing doing. This is our business. We'll be finished if we start violating secrecy. So the German government paid a bribe of $450 million to the most senior officer of the Liechtenstein bank and got all the accounts of every secret account on a CD given to them. They took that CD, downloaded it, and found there were 24 countries which officials had secret bank accounts. And so they wrote to all 24 that I've got this account. Do you want it? 23 countries wrote back saying, please send it immediately. One country did not write. That was India. So we had to go to the Supreme Court, get an order. And even today, although the Supreme Court has been given the order, they're saying, no, you can't release it. You'll violate this and violate that. You will get it very soon. The French government got 788 Indian names in the Hong Kong Shanghai Bank by the same method. They bribed the officials. And they didn't wait for asking whether India would want it. They just sent the list to India. Now, what names they are, that also the government says, no, we can't release it. But I am very suspicious that maybe there are some important names there because unexpectedly the French have been able to sell their Rafale plane to India for 50,000 crores. Because it was not in the list. It was not top of the list and suddenly it emerged in top of the list. So there is no shortage of wealth of our country which is abroad. So I come back to this question. What is the implication of this 1,76,000 crores being pumped into our economic system? This was of course shared by many people. All of them have not yet come in the public eye, but they will. I'm not going to let go. And I would say what we have to understand is why is this so important to fight corruption? What happens when you engage in a corrupt act? I'm now talking of a public official who engages in a public act of corruption. Misuses a public position to commit corruption. Supposing there's a minister and he issues a tender, he rigs the tender so that a particular person gets the tender or qualifies for the tender, and then for a building of a road, say. And that person who gets the tender awarded, he gives a bribe to the minister. And after that, he then, instead of putting, in the construction of the road, instead of putting stones and rocks, he puts mud. And that one monsoon comes and that road is finished. So corruption leads you to get substandard products. It is below merit. You don't get the most meritorious project, doesn't get the money. And you suffer because of that. In every field, whether it's adulteration of medicines or adulteration of foods, everywhere it is this pressure of corruption which is doing it. Second thing is that this money is often used for in places where cash is a method of transaction. For instance, today the government has permitted forward trading in food grains, in agricultural products. And what we find is that people who have a lot of black money go now to the wholesale market, buy vegetables, buy rice, they buy oil seeds, all this, and then put them in a cold storage or go down. And then when the prices shoot up, then they bring out these, and after that prices come down, but they would have earned their profit. Today the prices are down because of that reason that the godowns have been opened, the cold storages have been opened. So inflation today in India is only because of corruption, in my opinion. I've been teaching economics for so many years, and one of the most elementary lessons is, if supply increases, prices will decline. India is growing at 8% per year, so supply is increasing very fast. Then how is inflation increasing by 16%? We'll have to write a new Indian economics that if supply increases, prices will fall everywhere except in India. So inflation today is because of that. What about these property values? Look at what's happening in Bombay. Can you afford, even get a decent flat for 25 lakh rupees today? Look at the prices of all the plots which have been shooting up. This is also because money that is used is largely cash in the construction industry. Then, with some of that money, what do you do? Build magnificent houses. You put air conditioner in every room, including in the bathroom. And you put yourself with all the luxury goods you can get. So what happens is the rate of profit of luxury goods starts going up. And so investor says, why should I produce cloth and other common man's goods when I'll only get 5-7% on the rate of return? Let me invest it in luxury goods, and I'll get 25%. So your investment priorities are completely lopsided today in India. 70% of our investment today, directly or indirectly, is going to support luxury goods industry. And the common man is suffering. They're supposed to have a large number of poor people, but they're not able to get it. And where the money should go, it doesn't go. For example, today we are the cheapest agricultural country in the world, cheapest cost, lowest cost agricultural producers in the world. We produce per acre much less than Japan and South Africa. We have 12 months of the year we can do agriculture, unlike the United States, which has snow for 5 months, and so only 7 months of the year they can do agriculture. So in Europe, so in China. But India is gifted, 12 months of the year you can do agriculture. But yet only less than 25% of the land grows more than one crop, because the investment in agriculture is going down. That's not where the profits are to be made. Profits are to be made in property, profits are made to be in producing luxury goods. So your investment, where it should go, it doesn't go. Our cows, for example, their milk is the cheapest in the world. Europe sells milk at 15 times the price of the cow in India. How many cows we have? We have 150 million cows. And the average cow today is producing only, the cow is producing on the average only 200 liters per year. An Israeli cow produces 11,000 liters per year, just by better nutrition, better care and so on. And if our 150 million cows produce 11,000 liters per year, I will have to come to this conference or this meeting swimming in milk all the way from Delhi. That much milk we will have. And you can export it to Europe. Indian agriculture is the only sector which is the leading potential sector for participating in globalization. But we don't have our focus on that. Many people are surprised when I oppose Walmart's coming to India. They say, I'm surprised you, who's so pro-market, has opposed it. I said, yes, market should have a level playing field. It should be fair in competition, not free competition, but fair competition. How is it not a fair competition? In China, they have got Walmart, and why not in India? I said, because China during communist rule destroyed the trading class completely. And therefore they had to import the trading class through this method. All this FDI was a method by which they were able to provide marketing services and so on. India has always had a flourishing trading class. And this trading class is in micro levels. And therefore, can they compete with Walmart? How can they compete with Walmart? Walmart will bring capital at 2%, 3% interest rate. Our people will not get capital at less than 12%. But Walmart will participate in our labor force, which is cheapest in the world. I am ready to allow Walmart to come to India, provided the United States allows our labor to be taken on a contract basis for construction projects in the United States. Will they allow it? They say, no, it's an immigration problem, we cannot allow. Even on outsourcing, they're getting so agitated. So it's an unequal thing that people coming from abroad, they say that that they want free flow of capital. What about free flow of labor? That is not acceptable. That's an immigration problem. So we have to have our eyes open. Somebody told me the other day, oh, this license cancelling will have a bad effect on foreign investment. I said, do you know that why foreign investors come to India? They come to India because they can make a profit. And in China, they kick them every day, but still they go because they can make a profit there. Here, no matter how much namaste you do to them, they will not come unless they can make a profit. How much, though you can do Shatanam Dandavat, even then they will not come. It's only for profit they are coming, and they have to come to our country on our terms. We cannot have them come on any other terms. And that's the practice in the United States also. Or do you think our companies like Infosys and all have an easy time in those countries? So let us be just very clear. This money is weakening our resolve in that field to protect our national interests. This money is now going abroad and deposited in foreign bank accounts. How? Through the Hawala route. Hawala route is via Dubai. And I can tell you from personal knowledge that every Hawala transaction is documented and put on the files, in the computer files of ISI. ISI knows exactly which minister has how much account in which bank in a foreign country of Europe. Now that's a dangerous thing, because everybody wants to appear to be honest. So if tomorrow Pakistan tells the minister, you are making hard anti-Pakistan statements, we'll bring out with your bank account, I think they will maybe get frightened. I sometimes wonder, why are we so hesitating on hanging Afzal Guru? The Supreme Court said hang him. Kasab, they say, the court has said hang him. But we going on thinking whether we should do it. It's not only because, the demand is not only because these are Muslim terrorists. What about LTT? They killed Rajiv Gandhi, but they have still not been hanged. The Supreme Court not once but twice in the review petition also said they should be hanged in 1999, and today is 2012. So this is because of blackmail. You are afraid. We have today the weakest government, not only because of Manmohan Singh, but every minister, I can tell you, is a blackmailable quantity today. This is the saddest part of our state, and this is because of corruption. This is the implication of corruption. Everybody wants to find fault with Manmohan Singh, and people ask me, why are you soft on him? Well, there's no question of my being soft on him. Of course, I know him. But if he goes, who will come? Someone better? I don't see it. If the whole UPA is to be sent, I as an opposition member would welcome it. But why target Manmohan Singh? He has not made money in 2G at all, I can tell you. He kept on watching while this was going on. Bhishmacharya also watched Draupadi being stripped. So we cannot, just because you're watching, that's a civil wrong. It's called malfeasance in power. But it's not a criminal act. There's not even a whiff of criminality in that. Anybody is so weak. And he was chosen because he was weak. But your prime minister's chair has so much power, why can't he use that power? Sir, have you ever been to a circus? In a circus, there will be in one cage 5 lions. We call in Hindi lions a sing. 5 lions like Manmohan Singh, you see. And the ringmaster will come and close the gate of that cage, and then he'll crack a whip and say, get up on that bench. And these lions will climb up. Each lion is strong enough that if it uses his paw on that ringmaster, he will be dead. But they obey him because the mind has been prepared that way. Let me tell you, strength is not important. What is important is your mindset. If you have a circus lion mindset, you will obey the orders. And that's what has happened with Manmohan Singh program. Not all numbers matter, you see. You have 1,000 goats standing at one place and one tiger comes. Goats have the majority, but they'll all run away. That is why I'm saying that today our mindset is being managed by this corrupt money. Media, television, all these things are being now used. Money power is using it to prepare your mind. That's another major minus effect for our society. Major implication. Your stock market here is now almost become a rigged market. Why? Because the money goes abroad and then the cash in dollars you take to Morgan Stanley or Fidelity Insurance, Fidelity Investments or Goldman Sachs, and you put it on the counter and say, here's my Indian passport, give me a participatory note. And that participatory note has nothing on it, no serial number, nothing, except the amount you have placed on the counter. You take that participatory note, come to India, make a photostat copy, give to the Reserve Bank. Reserve Bank will give you a check that you can invest it in the stock market. And you go and invest in stock market. And the stock market booms up. You sell it at the top, and with the rupees that you get as capital gains, you take it to the Reserve Bank and say, I did it through the participatory note, so please convert this entire thing into dollars. It is converted to dollars, you take it abroad. So the black money goes abroad and comes back to India, earns money and goes out again. This was necessary because I was told that one day Sonia Gandhi complained to Chidambaram when he was finance minister. What is this? These Swiss bank people, they instead of giving us interest on our accounts, they are making claiming service charges of 2%. So we must find some way. And Chidambaram, being the loyal minister that he was, he came up with this participatory note. Damodaran opposed it, so he lost his job. They brought somebody else. People say sometimes, why are you so much after Sonia Gandhi? She wants to be a bahu in our country. She even wears a sari, puts on a tika. She's trying to be one of us. So I said, I'm not fooled. When Ramayana, in Ramayana, when Ravan came to abduct Sita, and he felt that she won't cross the Lakshman Rekha. So what did he do? He put on the clothes of a sannyasi. He came in Bhagwa, and out of regard for the Bhagwa, Sita crossed the Lakshman Rekha. So I'm not going to be fooled by the clothes people wear. It's not an important thing. I'm willing to debate with any congressman all these facts that I have know about her as saying. And some of them she has herself admitted. She claimed in the election returns, election nomination forms, an affidavit that she had got a degree in English from the University of Cambridge. I went to University of Cambridge for a lecture and found out that there was no such student. So I asked them to give it to me in writing. So they gave it to me in writing. I gave it to the speaker, Manohar Joshi, who then sent it to her, asking for comments, and she writes back to say it was a typing mistake. So I told Manoj Joshi, typing mistake means comma, full stop, and spelling. But a whole sentence. So he said, what shall we do? I said, send it to the Guinness Book of World Record for the longest time. There's no question of my being against a foreigner or anything like that. It's a question, that is my job as an opposition to point to the faults. It's not, if I found somebody in the opposition, in the ruling party as good, I will not oppose him. I've been defending Manmohan Singh even when people, my friends have been criticizing me. When Rajiv Gandhi was there, I was his closest friend. He and I together created the Chandrasekhar government. Narasimha Rao made me a minister. And in fact, he used to listen to me. First day he took over Prime Minister, he called me up and said, Swami, you have prepared some blueprints, give it to me. So I said, will you implement it? He said, yeah, I will. And he did. The credit, in fact, doesn't go to me because I use my brains to produce a blueprint. It doesn't go to Manmohan Singh because he implemented it. The credit goes to Narasimha Rao for having that. And we produce such a high rate of growth. Where are the communists today? They kept telling me, I remember Namboodiripad used to say, that in the Soviet Union there is no inflation, there is no unemployment, there is no poverty. In August 1991, I told Namboodiripad, now there is no Soviet Union also. We had only 3%, 3.5% rate of growth at that time, which Devashish just now said is the Hindu rate of growth. How is it a Hindu rate of growth? It's a Soviet rate of growth. Putting the blame on the Hindus is wrong. But anyway, the fact of the matter is that we produced double the rate of growth within 3-4 years, that we are having 3.5% to 7%, and now it went right up to 9%. And if we do not have corruption in India, I'm telling you, our growth rate will not be less than 14% per year for the next 14 years. Because then you have vast amount of resources. And the decision making will be on merit. And if it is on merit, then you will get the best possible use of your resources. It will not be an inefficient or inoptimal use of resources. So now, question is, what do we do? How do we clean up this Indian society? First, let me make a few brief comments and then get into these various methods that are today available in our country. Let me say that if we use our technology properly, then corruption can be controlled. Take for example, 1970s, railway reservations was the most corrupt thing that could happen, most harassing thing. You had to bribe the station master, the ticket collector, the man at the counter. Now, because of computerization, for which we have to give credit to Rajiv Gandhi, this computerization has completely reduced that corruption. Completely reduced it. So by technology you can do it. Now you can download forms in villages and all. People are very happy because now I find even villages people having laptops and printers. They can get all their land records, information, everything by printout. So technology is one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is to ensure that people who get caught are given. You may have a low probability of getting caught, but once caught, you then give them the maximum punishment. And that would mean that a person would be any person will be personally hesitant to do corruption because they say, well, the bribe I can get, but the implications or the consequences are so heavy, I don't want to do corruption. In America it happens, it doesn't happen here. In America on January 8, 2008, there was a press conference in New York addressed by a man called Bernard Madoff. And he said, I confess that I have stolen pension funds and I am ready to meet any punishment. On the same day in Hyderabad, Ramalinga Raju of Satyam was addressing a press conference saying, I have defalcated my company accounts and made a lot of money, and I'm ready to face any punishment. More or less the same message, same confession. In 6 months, Madoff was convicted for 150 years and now is in jail. And Satyam Ramalinga Raju, he is in bail in air-conditioned comfort. Martha Stewart in the United States only phoned up, only one thing she did. She phoned up her stockbroker and said that she had heard in a cocktail party that such and such company is going to sell. So get rid of his shares. On that, they sent her to jail for 6 months. She was the most celebrated TV personality in terms of home cooking and things like that. But they didn't spare her. They put her in convict's clothes and sent her to jail. And asked the Americans, why are you so harsh on this woman? They said, if you get caught, then that's it. That means if you have a low probability but high consequence, then on the average, it's a disincentive to be corrupt. So we have to have that. Why I'm going after this 2G in such a way and at the big names is because that is the only way to create a climate that everyone personally feels, baap re baap, kya ho jayega hum logon ka. You know, that atmosphere. Other thing we need is that all of you should have a positive attitude. We are very negative people. नहीं कुछ नहीं होगा, कोई नहीं पकड़ा जाएगा, सब छूट जाएंगे. Every judge will be purchasable. I don't think that is correct also. But you have to have a positive attitude. Yes, we need to do it and we will do it. And some things will happen because of that. This is the art of positive thinking. This negativeness must go. Of course, the best thing that can have is if you don't need many crusaders. Even in a cabinet of 40 members, if you have just 4 honest people and gutsy people, not the honest like Manmohan Singh, but with the spine in your back. So if you have gutsy people who are also honest, I can tell you in just 4 people, that is 10% of the cabinet, can produce you a complete transformation. Because the machinery is so large that you can do wonderful things. I am doing today alone. Every day people ask me, usko bhi pakdo, you know. See, I don't have the machinery. Even to get the documents, I have to make so much effort and use all my resources in terms of personal contacts and network and so on. So if you're in government and there are honest people there, and not all, only 10% of your ministers are honest, and your prime minister especially has to be honest, then I'm going to tell you that corruption in this country will go very fast. Because the tradition of this country is simplicity. Tradition of country is sacrifice. And therefore that leadership has to come, it can only come through an election. It can come in big cities. You did it. I mean, the Indian people have done it when it all entered their brain that it has to be done. For example, 1977, I stood from Bombay. I was elected twice to Lok Sabha from Bombay, from the northeast Bombay. I didn't have a penny in my pocket when I contested this 77 election. People gave me the money, people gave me the votes. Same thing the next election also, the following election. I won without spending any money. So money is not a factor where the people are aroused. Unfortunately, the people have been betrayed so many times that they become cynical. But please, no matter how many times you're betrayed, never become cynical. Be positive, say, okay, next time we will do it, and it can be done. In fact, when I started this 2G prosecution, people say, oh, kuch nahi hone wala hai. This is too big an amount. Nothing will happen. No minister will ever go to jail. Minister started going to jail. First when Raja, then Kanimuri. Now Maran's turn is any day. Chidambaram just missed, but it won't be very long. the superintendent of jail, Tihar jail sent me, told my friend, you please tell Swami, bada dikkat paida kar raha hai. So I said, why? He says, he's only sending Madrasis to jail. So I said, what's wrong with that? He said, because the Bawarchi says they all demand masala dosa and idli and I can't do it. I said, okay, wait till an Italian comes and asks for a pizza. Today there are three major movements for fighting corruption. One is led by Anna Hazare. The other is by Baba Ramdev. And the third, some of us, about 15 of us, people who have held high positions, people who have been members of the directors in the United Nations, people who have been director of the IB, people who have been great chartered accountants, that kind of thing, 15 people were assembled. And they said, we said that Anna is working for a new law. Baba Ramdev is mobilizing the rural masses. And we need at least another team which will use the present laws and till the new law comes, get action so that people can have confidence that something is happening. And that committee is called Action Committee Against Corruption in India. And yesterday, in the evening, all three forces, in my opinion, should work together, but we haven't yet been able to persuade Anna Hazare's people that that is necessary. But Ramdev and myself yesterday addressed a joint meeting in the evening, one of the largest meetings ever. So the movements are there and it will take place. We know how to get action. For instance, this judgment the Singhvi and Ganguly have given to me on the sanction for prosecution. Originally, I had asked for sanction to prosecute Raja. I sent a letter to the PM, and the PM didn't reply to my letter. I sent 5 letters, he didn't reply to any one of them. That was a bit surprised because I know him so well. He replies to every other letter of mine. So why didn't he reply? Finally, I said, instead of embarrassing him and asking him, I'll go to the High Court. And I went to the High Court dismissed my petition. Then I went to the Supreme Court, and it came before these 2 great judges. And they have laid down a new law that number 1, sanction, if you apply, it should be not more than 4 months, 3 months plus 1 month if you want to if the sanctioning authority wants to consult the Attorney General. And after 4 months, if you do not give sanction or deny sanction, then it shall be assumed that you have given the sanction. They have said that this requires a parliamentary amendment, but this is a Supreme Court observation, so it's already in a sense de facto law. They also said one thing which was very, very, very extraordinary, which the media didn't cover adequately. And that is that earlier on, if I went to say the CBI or to the police and said, here is my information about a commission of an offense of corruption, please investigate. And if the person is a public official, the police will say, where is the sanction? And you will not get be able to pursue. Now, the court, through Justice Ganguly's observations, has now laid down very clearly that as far as asking for investigation is concerned by any citizen, you don't need sanction. You can get an investigation done by any police, any CBI, any enforcement directorate just by giving it. So if you find any officers here, and it's a local offense which the Bombay police has to investigate, you can now give it and quote this judgment and say, no, now I don't need sanction for investigation. So this is another major development that has taken place with the pursuing of existing under the existing laws. The laws getting confirmed, amended by the Supreme Court. So here is another example of what an average citizen can do. He documents it, goes to the agency and gives it. If they don't give it, then you can always go to the High Court and say they are not doing duty. Like I went to the Supreme Court and said the Prime Minister is not replying to my letters. And for the first time in the history of, in my opinion, the history of the world, perhaps Pakistan is number 2, but we are number 1, where the Supreme Court has issued notice to the Prime Minister of India to explain why he didn't reply to a letter. My principal was saying, who is Swami? He is just an ordinary citizen. How can he write to the Prime Minister? Now after this order of the Supreme Court, he is keeping quiet on that. He is talking about other things now. He is talking more about BJP. He doesn't talk about me. Because if he talks about me, I'll give it back to him. So I think, these are all developing things. These movements need to be supported. Anna Hazare has got a long tradition. After all, I represented Bombay for 2 parliament terms. I know how on local issues he fought, laid down his life. I mean, at the risk of his life, he has done it. Baba Ramdev is got a tremendous following, particularly in the poorer and backward classes. And if all of us combine, it will be a major thing. And for that, that, of course, it will mean that the Anna team has to get rid of its aversion to politicians. You can't do without politics in India. You need party politics because that's part of democracy. We need to clean up the parties also. And you need to elect good candidates. What you can do in an election, for example, to minimize corruption, is you look at the candidates. Which of them is the best? Don't say that I am none of the above. That's an escapism. Least worst, if not the best. And tell that candidate whether he's going to win or lose. Don't worry. Don't bother about that. You tell him, don't come to my area. I will mobilize the votes in my area. And you go somewhere else. Because one of the biggest headaches is, I've been elected 5 times to Parliament, and I find the biggest headache each time is that at that time everybody wants you in their area, and it's too big an area to go in a 15-day election period. And in the end what happens is that you start spending money, sending volunteers, and so on and so forth. Therefore, to minimize expenditure, each of you in your area select a candidate who you think is the best and should represent you. And then tell that person, don't come to our area. We will mobilize for you, and we will ensure that the voter goes to the booth on the vote day of voting. This is another thing that you can do. Big things can come by accident. Big issues of catching some minister and putting him in jail, and all these things can come at any time without your expectation. I never thought that I would get so deeply into the fight of corruption. It just came. It was just a simple thing. I was sitting at home reading. 2 officers came at 9 p.m. and knocked on the door. And when I opened it, I recognized one of them. I said, hey, what are you doing here? He said, I have to talk to you. So I said, come on in. I brought him in. And then he said that he was somebody in the telecom ministry. And what happened that day, which I didn't know, was terrible. He said, what had happened? He said, Raja had issued a press release saying that all applicants, first he said everybody should apply. Then he sent out word that after 1st October 2007, he will not consider any application. And then after that was over, on the 10th of January, he issues a notice saying that, well, even up to October 1, 2007, too many applications come. So I'm arbitrarily putting it at the first cutoff on 25th September 2007. After everything is closed, that is totally illegal. Of course, the courts have struck it down. And then he says that all those who applied before 25th September, those who can come between 3:30 and 4:30 with a demand draft of 1650 crores, not 1650 rupees, but 1650 crore rupees, they will be given the letter of intent. Now, when does he issue that second press release? At 2:45 p.m. Says 3:30 to 4:30 you come. And he doesn't put it out in any TV or radio or any. He puts it out in the ministry website. And Swan Telecom and Unitech have already got 1650 crores demand draft in their pocket, and they are sitting in the minister's office. So they have no problem. Similarly, others also. So that kind of thing they had seen, and so there was a rush there, of all those 575 applications there were at that time of October 1. And all those people rushing, they brought gundas and hit them, threw them out, and all kinds of melee took place. So the officers were shaken, they came and told me that this has happened. And so there are people today in every sphere you find who are willing to stand up if they can find somebody else ready to take up their cause. So I would say, don't be pessimistic under any circumstance. This society, according to me, the great days of India are near. We will become a world power and a world economic power. But all this churning is necessary before we achieve that goal. But the most important thing that we can do, have a positive attitude. Yes, we will make India a great country which will stand on its own feet. That's the commitment. So I would urge you in the end, and I found that this response against corruption is so widespread that it's shaking everybody. Everybody is now talking about fighting corruption. Even the corrupt are saying that I will fight corruption. That's the climate change. And therefore, I urge you all to take a pledge that we will resist corruption. You don't have to come and stick your neck out. I mean, tomorrow, make sure that you are doing it in such a way that somebody can't single you out. But at least in your mind, it should be there, and in your personal conversations, you should be able to infuse this spirit. Yes, fighting corruption is our number one problem. Thank you very much.
Brilliant speech. I think one of the points that you made is that there are two sets of people fighting corruption. You are in touch with two of them. We would, at Moneylife Foundation, we are doing our little bit by educating people. We would like to join your effort in any way we can. What is more important is that you hope that India Against Corruption would join this effort also. So I think no better occasion than asking Mayank Gandhi of India Against Corruption here to talk to you. They are fully supporting of you. That's why they want to participate. Mayank, please come up.
I should be given 30 seconds to review.
Sir, this is our program. Sir, this is our program. Dr. Swami is our guest. Mayank Gandhi has asked us well in advance, so we will see. There is no demands. First, Mr. Mayank
Take
Gandhi.
long lessons. They are obviously.
We are not having a debate here, sir.
Kashmir to
Come on,
Pakistan.
please.
They will take over. That's right.
Sit down. Sir, please sit down. This is not the forum to raise these issues here.
Yes.
Let Mr. Mayank Gandhi speak first.
Then I will answer.
That is your issue. That they will allow you.
It's public issue, it's India's issue.
Thank you, Dr. Swami, for a wonderful speech. We have come here to felicitate you for the wonderful work that you are doing in fighting corruption. I just would like to take 2 minutes. Movements are fought over a long period of time. Should I speak in Hindi? आंदोलन होता है या लंबा होता है? महात्मा गांधी 1917 में उन्होंने चंपारण से शुरू किया, 1947 में हमें आजादी मिली। आंदोलन में जीत हार नहीं होती है, इसका एक मोमेंटम होता है, उतार चढ़ाव होता है। और इसके जो 3 प्रकार होते हैं लड़ने के, वो 3 हैं: मास मोबिलाइजेशन, लोगों को इकट्ठा करना; एडवोकेसी, जैसे हम लोगों के साथ पीपल इन पावर है उनके साथ बातचीत करके काफी चेंजेस आ सकते हैं; और एक लोकशाही में जो तीसरा है वो है जुडिशियल इंटरवेंशन। तो ये 3 तरीके से हम लड़ सकते हैं। और मैं देख रहा हूं लास्ट भ्रष्टाचार के विरुद्ध लास्ट 3 साल से लड़त बहुत जोर से शुरू हो गई है। जैसे 2G, कॉमनवेल्थ गेम, ये सारे भ्रष्टाचार के सामने हैं। और इसका सबसे पहले जो शुरुआत की वो बाबा रामदेव जी ने की। उन्होंने भ्रष्टाचार के विरुद्ध जिस प्रकार का देश के अंदर कॉन्शियसनेस, जिस प्रकार की सोच ले आए हैं, उसका फायदा हम सबको हुआ है। उसके बाद कुछ इंडिविजुअल्स हैं जैसे कि सुब्रमण्यम स्वामी हैं और विनोद राय जी हैं, और सरोज कपाड़िया जी के आने के बाद जो कोर्ट ने जिस प्रकार का एक्टिविज्म किया है, ये बहुत सराहनीय है। अन्ना हजारे जी ने लोगों को जागरूक किया। हम यही कहते हैं कि एक हमारा गोल होता है, गोल है जन लोकपाल, लेकिन उद्देश्य जो है वो है लोक जन जागृति। और इस जन जागृति इस देश में ऐसी हुई है जो आज तक कभी इतिहास में नहीं हुई है। तो इस भ्रष्टाचार के विरुद्ध लड़ने के लिए हर प्रकार के ग्रुप्स, हर प्रकार के इंडिविजुअल्स का बहुत बड़ा योगदान है। हम ये मानते हैं कि इसमें जो हमारे 5 पिलर्स होते हैं डेमोक्रेसी के, जो 5 स्तंभ होते हैं, लेजिस्लेटिव यानी कि पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज, ब्यूरोक्रेट्स, ऑफिसर्स, जुडिशरी, मीडिया और सिविल सोसाइटी, ये सब अपने अपने तरीके से अगर लड़े तो मुझे लग रहा है चारों तरफ से हम इस भ्रष्टाचारियों को घेर सकेंगे और ये देश भ्रष्टाचार से मुक्त होने की उम्मीद पर। मुझे लग रहा है सब अपना अपना रोल कर रहे हैं, और डॉक्टर स्वामी ने जिस प्रकार का रोल किया है इसको हम फेलिसिटेट करना चाहते हैं। हम खूब यहाँ सराहते हैं और आपकी आज बात सुन के हम बहुत इंस्पायर हुए हैं, और हमें सबको और शक्ति मिलेगी भ्रष्टाचार के विरुद्ध लड़ने की। जय हिंद।
Thank you very much. We are now going to invert things that we do a little bit. Before we go on to the public interaction, we want to do the small thing of thanking Dr. Swami and Mr. Shetty by presenting them mementos. May I request my colleague Vinita Deshmukh to please present a small memento to Dr. Swami for being with us today. This marks Moneylife Foundation's second anniversary. May I ask Devashish Basu to present a small memento to Mr. Jagdish Shetty? We are now going to have a brief interactive session with Dr. Swami. But because there are lots of questions already, we are going to request you to please send slips of paper, and we've got some questions already over here. Some of them, those who have sent them in advance know that Dr. Swami has already answered them. For instance, one of the questions is there any reason why you never included the Prime Minister in your charges? Okay, so that you have already answered. Another which has not been answered, which has been sent to us is, Dr. Swami, what do you think about Neera Radia being excluded from the entire investigation so far? So, would you answer that?
Well, her turn will come, don't worry about that. Naturally, the CBI is on its own will not do it, but I think Prashant Bhushan has already taken this up in the Supreme Court, and the matter is in the Supreme Court, and I'm certainly watching it with great care because there are a number of conversations in that which implicate a number of politicians. So it's a valuable piece of evidence which will be used, and it doesn't mean that because some of us, you see, who are working outside the government, we have limited resources to do everything at the same time. So therefore we are doing one by one. First we'll catch all the bada ustads and then we'll catch the chota ustad.
Barkadat also.
In this context, there is a question from the audience. You may like to stand up. This is Neera Radia's purchase of land in Tamil Nadu. They say that why is she not being criminally indicted? And the second is about Chidambaram's election victory in 2009, which is also controversial. Would you like to talk about?
Well, as far as the election on Mr. Chidambaram's matter is concerned, what really happened is that he lost. Then there was a recount asked for and he lost. Then another recount was asked, again he lost. And after